Okay, so picking up where we were with our clue application, we want to make this page with that welcome look more like this page. So I first need to consider how I might want to componentize this page. So in the top part of the page, that corresponds to this P tag down here. Now, of course, eventually we want to get to the point where we're dynamically generating these lists. But for now, I have view source up because I'm just going to go and copy this. All right, I did my copy, and I'm going to go over and create a new component that represents these lists at the top, the cards that I'm holding on to for the game, or the cards that are in the game. So I'm going to go to app, I'm going to right click. I'm in WebStorm right now. So again, you could also do this from a normal command line if you choose, but I'm going to use WebStorm. As I said, that's free use, and it's a very nice IDE. I'm going to select the new Angular CLI for command line interface. It's going to populate a menu of things I can create. And again, a number of these things we haven't talked about. We talked a little bit about module. Probably can guess what a class is, but other ones we'll talk about as we need. But the main thing we're talking about now are components. So I'm going to create a component, and I'm going to create that, call that component cards. All right, because he's going to represent the cards in the deck. It's going to populate cards for me. Notice I was already in context of the module, so it dynamically added the cards component with the import at the module level. Now for me to wire up what it would actually be shown on the screen, I want to go look and see what it actually generated. It generated something that looks a lot like what the root app looked like. It has its own selector now. Instead of app root, it's app cards. It references the HTML and the um, component HTML and component CSS files, which are generated just like before. I have cards component empty. I have cards works, which is the default, but I don't have anywhere it's displayed. Right? If I go back to here, I haven't changed anything on the screen yet. If I want to actually have cards works show up on the screen, I've got to go back and display it here in my top level app part. Now when I do and save it, it refreshes the screen cards works. All right, but we didn't want cards works. We wanted to show the markup associated with the markup I was copying out of, all right, the sample app that we have over here. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to come back here and boom, there it is, right? This looks like this. Of course, why? Because all I did was cut and paste and bring over the raw markup. We will get to the point where we're going to change that and be dynamic. Well, the first step of dynamic would be just to take the cards and say, I want to put those in a class. Now, what did we do in the app? In the app component, we saw a reference to title. We saw in the component file a property called title. Now, we have over here three different things: rooms, guests, and weapons. So how about we take and put this string inside our TypeScript. Let's create a property. Let's call that, we'll do it just like the app one. We'll say that property is rooms. And we'll say rooms equals this. Okay. We'll save that. We'll go back to the HTML file, and now I'm going to say rooms. Okay, let's see what happens. No change, right? It recompiled though, and everything was fine. Well, why? Because I actually just cut and pasted the same markup. Um, if you don't believe me, let's change one of the rooms here over in our spec file. Instead of the kitchen, study, living room, dining room, library, let's call the library the office. All right, save that, recompile, and now I have office here, right? So all I'm doing is a text substitution. I can do the same thing for our other ones, our guests, or what we might call our suspects. So I'm going to call it suspects because that's who they really are in Clue. I'm going to go back to the TS file. I'm going to create a suspects property. All right, do that part. I can make my window a little bigger so we see it. And likewise, we're going to have a weapons property here in a second, and I'm going to cut and paste over from here and do the same thing. Okay. All right. Now notice I'm not using anything in the constructor or anything like that. I'm just using straight properties that can be shown here, right? So I save, I come back here, and I still have the same stuff. And again, just so we can uh, you can believe me that I haven't changed anything here. Let's change Professor Plum to Professor Gary. Let's change Candlestick to Baseball Bat. All right, as our thing here. And I go refresh, and I have Professor Gary with a baseball bat. All right, so I just created a component that uses cards. And the value of putting this inside as a property is it's a first cut at showing the templating aspect using these double curly braces. Going forward in a minute, we'll see that we will dynamically bind these things more to expressions. Right now, these properties are just static, meaning they're just strings. So this is really just a string substitution, a string interpolation as it's called. But obviously, we're going to want to move forward and do more interesting things where the cards that we would show would be dynamic based on an array we would have on a class. We want to show the results of our shuffle and these kinds of things going forward. But for now, I'm going to go ahead real quick and complete. I'm going to go create another component, right? The next thing I want to do is to create, I'm going to use form HTML. I'm going to create a form here using the name. So if I look in the HTML, that's this component. So I'm going to copy that. Okay. I'm going to go back to WebStorm over here. I'm going to minimize this guy for a second, and I'm going to create a new, again, component, Angular CLI component. I'm going to call this, this form was for users, so I'm going to call it, I'll just call it users or user. All right, it's going to create a user form. Same kind of thing. If I go back to the module, I'll see user components in here, added after the cards component. I'll open up the user component. I'll look at the TypeScript, similar kind of thing here that we expected. I'll go to the HTML. Right now it says user works, but I'm going to just go ahead and put the form in here. I'm going to save that. I'm going to go back to my root container component here and say after the cards, I'm going to add a extra line as raw markup, and then I'm going to add the app user part in here. I'm going to save that. I'm going to go back here, and now I have a form like this. Now, of course, there isn't anything that I can process here, right? I can do this and press enter, and nothing happens, right? Because even though there's a form tag, it has nowhere to go. It's actually using whatever it was linked to. If you notice, this actually changed to sample2.html on the URL because that's what my sample app did. But in fact, because if I look here, that's what the input type button on click window location href said go to sample2.html. But we're going to have to change that, right? We're going to have to respond to user actions through Angular to do something interesting. So right now, that's effectively been a no-op for us in this application. We'll worry about that again in one of our videos going forward. Let's go back and do the next components. Now again, part of your design thing here is, do we envision these next selectors here as one component with three select, right? That's the HTML down here with those three. Do we envision those as one component with three additional components in them, one for each selector? That is, or is it all one component with the guest button as well? So I'm going to create it as one component. I'm going to keep it simple. And now in the future, depending on how I want to handle the kinds of things that I'm doing, like enabling the button, I may choose to refactor it. But for now, I'm going to treat the rest of this, including the guest button, as one component. So I'm going to go grab all that markup here from down below. That starts here and goes down to here. And I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go back up here. I'm going to create yet a new component through the command line interface. I'm going to call this the guess, since that's what we're doing is guessing. All right, same thing. Lather, rinse, repeat. I have this here. I have an HTML part. That HTML part I want to turn into the form that we just had. I'm going to save that. I'm going to go back to the module and look, I have a guest component just like the other components added, which means I can go to the HTML file here and add app-guest, save, re-render the clue part, and guess what? Everything else kind of looks here. I may want to make it look a little bit better. I'll add the break tag here, add a blank line, I'll save it, and now when I rendered, right? So this starts looking a lot like this page here, right? Now, but again, there's, even though these are working form elements, there isn't, we don't see, for example, the guest button becoming enabled or anything like that, because we have to convert all that to Angular. So right now I have 4 components. I have a master app component that's rendering a blue welcome to Clue. I have the cards component that's outputting the cards for the game. I have the user component that's has the form for entering the username with no working behavior yet, and I have the guest component with the 3 guest selectors and the guest button. Again, not operational at this point. That's some of the parts that we'll have to add. So I'll stop this video here, and then we'll go forward with those parts coming next.